What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today I'm checking out this new album from Mammoth, The End. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. Mammoth's third studio album, The End, was just released on October 24th. And if you're unfamiliar with Mammoth, this is a project from Wolfgang Van Halen. Yes, the son of the late great Eddie Van Halen, who over the last several years has been steadily carving out his own path in rock music. The band, which before this album came out was known as Mammoth WVH, was started as a side project when Wolfgang was a member of Van Halen. And it wasn't until after the death of his father that the band became the primary focus of Wolfgang. The band's debut album, Mammoth WVH, which was released in 2021, I think really showcased Wolfgang's skill, as he played every instrument across that album. He also sang all the songs on the album. And I think it also showed how skilled he was as a songwriter. I think that first Mammoth album really showed his clear intentions that he didn't just want to coast on his family's legacy. So when the second Mammoth album came out in 2023, musically it was very similar to the first album, but it was a little more polished, it was a little sharper than the first album. And the first time I listened to Mammoth 2, I think the big difference between the two albums was Wolfgang sounded a lot more confident on that second album. But going into listening to that first Mammoth album, I didn't really know what to expect. Stylistically, I didn't know if it was going to be similar to like the later Van Halen stuff, or if he was going to go in almost a completely different direction with it. But really it was that first Mammoth album that helped him establish his solo voice. Like I said, he wrote all the songs, he played all the instruments on that album. Every second of that album was his introduction to the music world, and fans and critics loved it. And stylistically, his music is not what I was expecting it to be. It is hard rock mixed with alternative. It's got some more melodic elements to it. But especially listening to that first Mammoth album, it sounded like a young, hungry musician that really wanted to prove themselves. I remember Eddie Van Halen doing interviews back when I think Wolfgang was still a teenager, when he was doing interviews talking about how skilled of a musician Wolfgang was at that time. So I think regardless of what he does in his career, there's always going to be, I think, unfair expectations put on him. People are always going to look and compare him to his father. And I think regardless of what he does on his albums and in his career, what he does musically, there's always going to be those comparisons. But so far in Wolfgang's solo career, I don't think it's had a negative impact so far. I will say, going back and looking at the first couple of Mammoth albums, I think there was some unfulfilled promise, especially on that first Mammoth album. It felt like an album that was just the beginning, which, it was. It felt like he was laying the foundation on that album, and he would build upon that with Mammoth 2. And that's why when I saw that he was releasing a third album, I was really interested to see the direction that he would take on this next album. Because there was a lot of growth from Mammoth WVH to Mammoth 2, but there still felt like there was something missing on that second Mammoth album. It was a little slicker, it was a little more polished, the songs were maybe written a little tighter, but it felt like at times, Mammoth 2, some of those songs were just maybe kind of forgettable. There were times on Mammoth 2 where it was more experimental than the first Mammoth album was, but maybe I wanted it to be a little bit more experimental. And maybe that's where some of the expectations that Eddie put out there on Wolfgang at such a young age maybe colors my expectations a little bit, because I want him to be one of those musicians that kind of pushes the boundaries, because, that's what his father was doing at that age. But even for a musician like Wolfgang, following up an album like Mammoth WVH can be difficult, because there's those pressures of kind of recreating or trying to recreate what you did on that first album while still kind of growing as a musician. And that's why I think overall Mammoth 2 was a successful album, because there was that growth. You could see that evolution. You could see that he was trying to take some risks while still doing a lot of what he did on that first album. Because the risk is losing some of that rawness, some of that authenticity of that first album for more of a polished sound. And back to produce his third straight album with Mammoth is Michael Basquiat, which he's worked with a whole host of great musicians over the years. I know he's worked with Alter Bridge, he's worked with Seven Dust, he's worked with Limp Bizkit. With as successful as the first two Mammoth albums were, it's no surprise to see him back on this new album. And the new album was also recorded at Eddie's famed 5150 Studios in LA, which is now owned by Wolfgang ever since his father's death. And I'm sure it's where all future Mammoth recordings are going to be done also. So I've long said it's really important for an album to start off with one of its stronger songs, if not the strongest song on the album, as a way to draw the listener in and make them want to listen to the entire album, especially in the streaming age that we live in now, where you have pretty much every album at your fingertips. And, if you sit down and listen to an album and you're not instantly pulled in by the first song, it's so easy just to skip past it and really just kind of skip on to something else. So it might be even more important now than ever to have a really good, really strong song kick off that album, because musicians don't get a second chance to make that first impression again. And that first track also sets the tone for the album. It sets the expectations for the album. So even though a lot of people don't think about the sequencing of the album, I think it's still something that is still very important today. The album opens with the song One of a Kind, and it's a blend of really heavy riffs and melody, and I think it's a perfect pick because I think it takes a lot of the good stuff off of the first two Mammoth albums and blends them all together in one song. I think the song does run on a little long. I want to say it's like right around 5 minutes, but it's got some great guitar riffs in it. I like how he changes up the tone of the song for the last minute of it. So even though it runs a little long, it doesn't have this big bloated feeling. It does kind of break up the sound of the song over the course of it. So even though this might not be the best song on the album, I think it's the perfect pick to open it up. And I think he only released 2 singles before the album came out, and I was kind of surprised that he didn't pick this as one of the singles for it. Because like I said, I don't think it's the best song on the album, but I think it's definitely up there as one of the strongest. The second song on the album, it's also the lead single off the album, is the title track, and it opens with a guitar riff that you would expect from somebody with the last name Van Halen. Musically, I think it is a continuation of what you heard off the opening track, but it is a little more aggressive. I think really this song, more than any other song on the album, feels more like a nod to his father. I do think this is a stronger track than One of a Kind, but I think because of the way this song is structured and the way this does have like a kind of an Eddie Van Halen feel to the song, I think One of a Kind is a better opening track because of that. But I think this fits in perfectly as the second track behind it on the album. Same Old Song changes up the mood and tempo of the album with its fuzzier guitars and grittier sound. Even though I think this is a really good track, one of the better tracks on the album, I don't think a lot of people will pick this as one of the standout tracks. But I can see this being one of those tracks that over time will be seen as one of the better deep cuts on the album. The song has a little bit of a thicker guitar riff to it, has more of like this almost like 70s swagger to it, a lot more than either of the first 2 tracks had. This is one of those songs that the first time I listened to this album, I repeated the song a couple of times, and every time I listened to it, the song got better each and every time. And every time I listened to the song, there were little parts of it that I picked up on that I didn't hear the first time I listened to it. The 4th track on the album is The Spell, which was the second single off the album. And the song has a little more of this almost like early 70s kind of groove to it. It's more melodic while still having a lot of those same hard rock elements that's become a staple of Wolfgang's music. It's one of those songs that's just kind of okay for me. There's nothing in particular that I can point to that I don't like about it. It's just one of those songs at this point in the album, it's just not all that memorable. But after listening to this track a second time, I think it's the vocals that I kind of have an issue with on this song. Lyrically, the song is okay. I think just the tone of his vocals. I don't know, maybe it's a track that I need to listen to a couple more times. The midway point of the album is I Really Want It, and it starts off with this really heavy, hard-stomping riff, but lyrically it just lacks that same punch that it brings musically. It's the first, I think the only track on this album that I can really truly call a skippable track. And after this song and the track that came before it, I'm starting to get a little nervous about the direction that this album's taking after starting off so strong. And so far up until this point, there's been some introspection to these songs, and then you get to this point, I don't know if he just tried to have more of a lighthearted moment in this song, but overall I just don't think it worked the way he wanted it to. And the first time I listened to the album, I thought to myself, maybe this is a song that I have to listen to a couple of times, and just kind of warm up to it. And the more I listened to it, it just, nothing was working for me. And this is just one of those songs that, if this was off the album, I think it might add to the album had it not been on there. The second half of the album starts off with the song Happy, and it has this slower, almost like 90s alternative vibe to the early part of the song. I think it's a good contrast to the more straightforward hard rock sound of the first half of the album. It's got more like a stoner rock kind of influence to it, and it really quickly became, I think, one of the standout tracks on this album for me. And it's a style I'd like to see Wolfgang experiment with a little bit more moving forward. But, overall, at this point with this song, it's great to see the album get back on track. And then the next song is Better Off, and while this does have some of the better guitar riffs on this album, this is one of those songs that, the second half of the album is very up and down, and this is one of the songs that's just kind of down for me. It's not a terrible song, it's not a skippable track, but Other than those great guitar riffs, it's just not all that memorable. I think the issue I have with this song is it does sound a little too similar to some of those earlier songs on the album. And I don't know if that was done intentionally to kind of tie the second half together with the first half of the album. Because I know Wolfgang did say that sequencing was done intentionally on this album. But because of those great guitar riffs, I'm not going to call it a skippable track. It's definitely one I need to listen to a couple more times, maybe to get a better feel for. But at this point, I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a trend on this album with this really strong first half and maybe like some inconsistencies coming through on the second half of the album. The song Something New is another departure from the normal sound that you've heard across this album so far. It has a more melodic, almost like swinging kind of groove to it. I think it's one of the more like radio-friendly kind of songs on this album. I don't mean that in a bad way. It just has maybe a little more of a mainstream kind of sound to it. And maybe it has more to do maybe with the production of this one song. I do think it's another standout track on somewhat of an uneven second half of the album. But stylistically, I like what he's doing on this song, where it's kind of changing up the pacing on the second half of the album. The penultimate song on the album is Selfish, and it gets back to that more like hard-charging, hard rock sound that's dominated the album to this point, but with a little more of a faster pace and a little more aggressive. I know Wolfgang did an interview a while back where he said this is probably the heaviest song he's ever done. But tone-wise, I like how he gets back to his roots to close out the album. It kind of builds on the intensity over the last third of the album. This is one of those tracks that could have easily been earlier in the album, but I think it works best as one of the later closing tracks of the album. Because it seems like over the course of the second half of the album, he's tried to change up the pace with a couple of different songs. And then, with that second to last song, he really gets back to that hard rock sound with one of his faster, more aggressive songs to kind of wrap up that song, kind of bring you back to that original sound. And then closing out the album is the song All in Good Time, and it opens with these more like bright guitar sounds before the song kicks in. And the song has this more like poppy kind of upbeat sound to it, and I've heard some people complaining about the song online, and they weren't a huge fan of this song closing out the album. I actually think this is the perfect song to wrap up this album with, because you've had this kind of heavier sound across this album. And then you get to the very last song, and it's got this more like upbeat kind of hopeful sound to it. It just sounds like a more positive way to wrap up the album. I know he intentionally picked this song to close the album out, which makes me think he did it for a reason. So I'm interested to see what he's got in store next for Mammoth. So overall, I thought this was a well put together album. It starts off really strong. It gets a little weak in the middle before it ends with a bang. But I think Wolfgang has done a great job, rising above all those expectations that have been put upon him from a very young age to become the musician that he wants to be. And by his third album, I think he's become confident in his own style of voice to do really whatever he wants to do. And I really do think it comes through on this album. I think dropping the WVH from the Mammoth name was a way for him to really kind of step out of his father's shadow and to really fully become his own musician. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him. Overall, I think this is a really solid album. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think this is a 7 out of 10. I can definitely see this as one of those albums that, could grow on me over the course of the year. I could easily end up, in my top 10 come the end of the year. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of this new album, The End from Mammoth. Of the 3 Mammoth albums, I think this is the best one yet. I think Wolfgang has an incredible career ahead of him. Let me know what you guys think of this new album. How would you rate it? Haven't listened to it yet. Have you picked up a copy of it? This one I probably won't pick up on vinyl. I might grab a copy of it on CD, though. Let me know what you guys think of this one. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.